Hi everyone, this is Ray and Kim. We just posted a video with an update on Jaymon's cancer treatment and him ringing the bell at University of Michigan Hospital. But we wanted to talk just a little bit more in depth about some of the struggles. For anyone who's been following along, you know the story. For those who haven't, I'll do a quick recap. He is my husband's special needs adult son. He has a host of medical problems. He's special needs. He's 25, functions at 3 years old. He has autism, critical diabetes.
Yes, yep. Produces no insulin whatsoever.
And a whole host of other medical problems that makes him behaviorally and medically extremely high maintenance. And he takes a team of people to take care of him. He can be violent at times, and when he turned 18, my husband signed a contract with the state for him to go into a group home because my husband is disabled and knew that his son would get better care. He was promised better care. He was promised a team of people that could take care of him. He would be in a behavioral home. He would be in a home with his peers. He would have socialization. He would be able to do activities and still go to school and all of the things that would enable him to live the best life possible. Not something that my husband could have provided at the house for him.
Right.
He would do activities, go out to eat, and like I said, have a good social setting. But the state had failed on many levels, on every level of not being able to fulfill their end of the contract, and to the point where they violated his rights and just all kinds of terrible things. So they ended up removing him from a group home illegally, and basically they were going to put him out on the street if my husband didn't take him back in, with the promise that he would only be there for a couple of days until they found a new group home. That was not the case. It's been a couple of years, and through that, the contract was terminated with a lot of nightmare for that. And Jaymon was then diagnosed with a terminal form of leukemia. So that updates us where we are. We've been through a lot of ups and downs with the home not being a safe place for me a lot of the times to live, even for my husband. Now, because of the cancer, Jaymon was taken off all of the psychotropic meds that the local community mental health med clinic had him on.
And he wasn't on any of those when he left the home.
And unfortunately, those meds were making him more violent and unable to control that violence, and he was hurting us and putting us in the hospital, and it was a terrible time.
It actually fueled a rage that's not present when those medications are absent.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's been off of the meds, but unfortunately been fighting cancer. He still has his issues where he still can be violent because just of the nature of the autism with his behaviors, even after being off of the meds. But it is markedly different. It's not as often. He still has to be managed, but it's been a lot better. And
he's more amiable and softer spoken when
he does start to get upset.
Yeah, he's being more mindful of that, and so I'm seeing him work that out. But when he was on all those medications, no one was even working with him at the homes to try to work through this.
So Jaymon still requires a team of people. When he was diagnosed with a leukemia, University of Michigan social workers promised me that he would not have to come back here to the house under my husband's care, that they would have
support services.
They would have a group of homes that they could choose from and facilities that he could go to that could handle his medical and behavioral needs. But upon discharge, that was no longer the case, and they said, oh, if we really knew, we may not have even continued treatment. And then we can talk about that in a different video later.
How long was it before any services actually did start to arrive?
It was several months.
Was it March?
He was released, I think it was,
January?
October.
Oh, no.
He was released in October. We had a court hearing in January because we were promised services upon his release for discharge, and the only way that Ray agreed to take him back into the home was to get support services and nursing staff, transportation. There was a whole host of all of these services that were going to be taken care of before you left the hospital. And that never manifested. And so we wrote a letter to the court because there was still a contract in place for that.
Right.
We wrote a letter to the court asking for help, and the response was...
And we also notified Adult Protective Services, thinking
right.
maybe they can help.
Right.
And, folks, don't do that.
So the result of that was, and I think I may have posted some videos prior to this, that I don't believe that if I had not been here and witnessed it with my own eyes, I may not have even believed it, because we went to court asking for the court to enforce the contract and get the help. And part of the issue is that these agencies were getting paid to provide services that they were not providing, and they were collecting the money, and they were keeping the money and not providing the services. So the ask was to enforce the contract, and in exchange, in response to that, they said that they were just going to take Jaymon away and put him in hospice. And so the court didn't see that that was really the right solution. So Jaymon ended up staying here, but that took a couple of months of time, and Jaymon was not receiving treatment during that time because he was not receiving the services that he needed.
Right. And I was asking...
that Ray needed.
And as his legal guardian, I might add, or for you if I don't mind, honey, but as his legal guardian, I'm obligated by the law to report any abuse that happens to him, any neglect that happens to him. And so that's what I did. And in reporting it to the court, that abuse that was occurring by the state of Michigan and these other agencies, that I became a target. And they actually tried to remove Jaymon from me initially because they used the failed transportation, medical transportation that we had, that no-showed us like 7 or 8 times, I think, to begin with.
What had happened is they actually constructed lies. They perjured themselves in order to make Ray look bad. Right. And we were able to actually prove that that was not happening. Right. Transportation. We have the letter from the insurance company and the social worker and the oncologist, and we had all of the letters saying that insurance would provide transportation for Jaymon. It's his right to have that, and they would provide that, and they no-showed several times. So those were the things we were trying to get enforced, and what they did is they used that to try to turn it and manipulate it. And like I had said before, the social workers on 2 separate occasions over this last couple of years have actually lied on the paperwork and lied to the judge, and it was the most unsettling
to watch somebody perjure themselves like
me,
that.
I can't believe it's happening type of moment. Like it was the most shocking, one of the most shocking experiences that I've had along those lines. But that all got sorted out, and Jaymon started his treatment sometime end of January, mid-February, I believe. The first round of chemo happened when he was in the hospital for 6 weeks. Then he came home. Then he had to go through the year, or almost the year of treatment. There were 8 inpatient week-long visits. So that's what he had started. And now, to say that all of those services were provided after time is sort of a little bit of an understatement. Transportation was provided, but Jaymon would go to University of Michigan 3 times a week. He would be gone a week every month. And that's another reason why I wasn't posting, because I didn't want to just advertise I was here alone, or that they were over there at the hospital, or where everybody was. So all of those times there were rides that would go to Ann Arbor and back, and that's a 2.5 hour drive one way. Insurance provides that. It's his service that they offer, and he's entitled to it, but several of those rides would take 2 to 3 hours
Well, for some
to get
reason,
arranged every time.
it took us 4 or 5 months to get him off out of the to get him onto them, even though this is paid for by his Meridian Healthcare Insurance. The status was a cab ride, and he wound up riding with methadone patients and drug users who are, and other people, and he's immune compromised. And we would protest,
dirty personal vehicles.
and it finally got worked out just literally weeks ago. But right before his last stay inpatient, there's a category that apparently nobody at the insurance had ever heard of except the new customer service representative who had just come from some other wing of the government insurance.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and what Jaymon was entitled to was medical transportation.
Yeah.
For a high-risk chemotherapy patient.
Yeah.
Which means he gets picked up in a medical vehicle, meaning it's clean, it can handle a wheelchair, it can handle somebody who might get sick in a ride. They take him directly to his appointment. They wait for him to get done. As soon as his appointments and chemo treatments are over, they come right back. They don't drop him off and wait for him to call to come pick him up 2 hours later. They are there, they're ready, they're waiting.
Right, it's not the cable guy.
There's nobody else in the vehicle.
Yeah.
And because so when Jaymon went through his chemotherapy treatment like a champ, I've never seen anything like it. We had issues in the very beginning where he was ripping his PICC line out from episodes and issues and just being special needs. They put an under the skin port in. That's worked very, very well. A lot of different, and that's for blood, where he goes 3 times a week for blood work. But the technicians don't always know how to access the port, so sometimes they would still have to end up poking him. That's a specialized type of port. Like when he went to
it's actually under the skin in your chest.
Yeah.
And it's visible, but if you're not trained in it, you're not supposed to
and it wasn't
mess with it
until the last 3 treatments that he really started to show signs of what I would consider to be typical symptoms of the chemo treatment that a lot of people that I have always heard complain about, the nausea, the infections, because they say it's the chemo that may not kill you, but the infections will. And he started to get some infections. He spent a week in the hospital with a bacterial staph infection. He spent another week in the hospital with a pneumonia, all within a 30-day period, right? And so if he can be protected from that, he should come through this. Like Ray said, there will be a biopsy, a bone marrow biopsy. He still has to go through 3 to 5 years of maintenance. At this point, it doesn't seem like he qualifies for the bone marrow transplant for several different reasons. That doesn't mean that will be ruled out forever, but if his behaviors don't get any better, then that will probably not be an option. There's still, we should find out what the prognosis for what his life expectancy should be, depending on, these bone marrow biopsies will happen every 6 months and what that's going to look like. We got the news that he may not be well enough because the cancer could return to actually go into any kind of group home. And so if this is what this is going to look like in the near future to late future.
Right. And working with the insurance company who they don't provide medical coverage at your home, and that's just not something they do. So, but Jaymon has both Medicare and Medicaid insurance, and so right now we're appealing with Meridian Insurance because we're trying to get a request for 24-hour care for him here at home. And the insurance has given us the runaround for the last 6 months just in telling us how to request it. They just keep saying, no, they're going to turn it down. But in order to access an appeal, you have to be denied the request.
But they haven't
And
done
so all they've done is deny the request verbally to us, and they won't tell us how to ask for that request in writing so that we can move forward. If you can't get something in writing, you can't go before an administrative law judge or before a court if you don't have anything in writing. So that's what we're trying to do.
One of the promises from the insurance company, and there were 2 representatives from the insurance company before Jaymon was discharged, and there was a meeting that had the oncologists, had the insurance companies, had the social workers, it had a whole host of people and doctors. And one of the promises was that Jaymon would have skilled nursing care here in the house. And Ray agreed that he would bring him back, but that nursing care needed to be here. And so they had a nursing agency lined up before we even left the hospital who canceled the first day out, never even showed up. And that is another reason why we said, hey, these services were supposed to be here. And that was one of the services. And it took a couple of months. We finally convinced the nursing agency to come in and work in the home. And their concern, that particular agency's concern, was the safety of their workers because Jaymon had been so incredibly violent.
Yes.
Well, now he had come home, and it was quite miraculous because he hadn't been violent in a couple of months because he was off of all those psych meds. Now, again, that slowly started to creep back in. It's nowhere near as bad as it was. And one of his workers from the agency, they actually hired her, happened to have worked with him somewhere else. And I won't name names or what had happened to her, but he had injured her very seriously. He'd actually knocked all her teeth out of her mouth at a certain point at the group home. That's how violent he used to be. But she saw the change in him and was willing to come back and work with him. And she was not able to work the number of hours that Jaymon actually needed, and so they hired somebody else to work with him. This person turned out to be somebody who was working 12 hours a week, maybe 17 hours a week at the most, and claiming 44 and a half hours and getting paid for 44 and a half hours. And when Ray was burning himself, he was just frazzled, burning himself out trying to take care of Jaymon and trying to figure out why he's so exhausted and always having to do all the work when the other worker wasn't here, and where's Jaymon's hours, and why doesn't he have Saturday, Sunday hours?
And every day that she was here, she was in training. It was like I had to repeat the same thing every day to her that she was here.
She caused
for weeks
a
and weeks
lot
and weeks
of chaos, and I want to be careful because if we name, even a little bit about who she was from, a criminal background and a criminal house, and it was just it was terrible. It was terrible. And it turned out she'd stolen from us. She'd stolen all the hours. She got paid for these hours. She was clocking. She was
getting paid for hours that I after calling off work, I would then have to take the trips to Ann Arbor for Jaymon instead of getting a break from that. And she was getting paid that whole time. She was getting
paid 8 to 4 every day.
That kind of makes you sour.
Right. But by the time we figured it all out, Ray needed to have a hip surgery, and we were trying to figure this out. And we're like, well, we don't want to accuse her if this isn't something that actually happened. And so we started to do our own detective work and had found out she was clocking in and out from her home. The nursing agencies have apps that are set up that you have to be within a certain distance. And that was a big argument with the nursing agency because they didn't believe that she actually lived close enough to do that from her home, but we were able to prove that she was.
Right.
That she was clocking in and out. And
well, it was only through the trips that I was taking to Ann Arbor and signing in for myself, and that they realized that she didn't actually go there, even though she reported the hours.
So we got Ray through the hip surgery, and there were a lot of phone calls that were made. A lot of things that had happened, and the nursing agency was, I have to say, I had to be real careful because at a certain point, they were supposed to have someone else replace her, and they were doing their own investigation, and the Agency on Aging, who funds part of this, was doing their own investigation, but they were only investigating and doing audits of whether or not what the workers were saying they worked matched what they were getting paid. not whether they were
Whether
actually here
that-
working those hours.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
was its own government audit there. So
Mhm.
so there were a lot of things that
The
happened
partial
there.
audit, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that really just caused a lot of chaos, caused a lot of drama. And unfortunately, this was also a person
exhausting.
who was
It
not
was just
appropriate.
exhausting.
She was not an appropriate, she did not handle herself appropriately, and it
Yeah.
was not anything to do with me being a jealous wife
No.
or another woman in my home and I was threatened. It wasn't anything like that. She
A
was
lot of
somebody,
personal space issues.
she was somebody
with me.
who very obviously dropped Jaymon and anything. She ignored Jaymon the second that Ray walked in the room.
Mhm.
Would try to bestow all these expensive, bizarre gifts on Ray
Yeah.
and give things and walking into the bedroom when he's changing his clothes was about the final straw, or having conversations with Ray that were inappropriate. And I literally got in
Mhm.
between them at some point right after
Mhm.
his hip surgery. And Ray's looking at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm blocking." And she was literally bobbing her head around him to talk to him, and I'm stepping
And-
in her way. It was the
Mhm.
most bizarre thing that, you just
Yeah.
dressed very inappropriately instead of wearing scrubs. Jaymon is a 25-year-old man and with autism that didn't go over very well either. She did not have that professional air
Yeah.
about her, and she would flip-flop back and forth. She would, once she realized she was caught, she was starting to work more hours. But once we were able to prove that these things had happened, and all of a sudden now she's here 40 hours a week for that week you had hip surgery, and then after that she was gone. The nursing agency did not do full
It was the
background
day
check.
after, she worked one day, I think, after my hip surgery.
Yeah.
And that was before we realized the magnitude of what was
Right.
missing. That wasn't even kind of on our radar that would happen at
Well, it was one of
that
those
point.
things.
That was we were naive.
There's so much chaos in this house with Jaymon. This isn't a home. This is a psych hospital and behavior home all in one. It is not
And a
what you
storage
would
warehouse.
a storage warehouse for the bait shop. Yeah, this is not what you would consider a home, a comfortable home by any means.
Yeah.
And so everything that we have is just stowed away, packed away, stacked. It's disheartening. But it's one of the situations where you go to get something, you're like, where did that go? I had boxes of those, or where'd that shoes go? Where'd that purse go? Where did that soap mold go? Where did...
Mm-hmm.
And you're questioning your own sanity, but I know I had that there a couple of months ago, or whatever it might be. And then we start putting things together, and it's so hard to actually think people would do that. But then I also started looking up the criminal background checks, which you can do at the courthouse. You can just look up the cases and see what the person's been charged with, accused, sentenced for, whatever. And come to find out she'd, stolen from Dollar General and had charges against her from different hospitals for fraud, whether it was insurance fraud or taking supplies, things like that. And she wasn't even a CNA. She was just an in-home worker, where she told us, "Oh, I'm the nurse."
Yeah.
So there's some things there. But moving on, we've just had a lot of problems with the nursing agencies. We've got a new nursing agency, and I love our new worker to death. She is phenomenal with him, but she's very pregnant and high-risk pregnancy, and so it's very concerning with Jaymon. We have all of our protocols in place that if he starts to get violent, she knows what to do, but it's still those motherly instincts kick in to want to make sure her and her baby are safe. This is probably not the best choice of employment for somebody who could be at risk. So, but she's wonderful with him. She really was. But today we had a situation where apparently that agency got fired, or their contracts were terminated through the agency that oversees them, and now we're stuck without caregivers for the next several days until they get that sorted out. So it's been a rocky road, and even then they can't fill the hours. They can't fill all the hours. So he's only getting...
And my problem really overall is that it's literally it's for and about the workers.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the clients.
Uh-uh.
It's not structured for the clients. It's not enforced for the clients. And even the change that they made today, just suddenly and abruptly, the replacing agency called me to inform me, we're your new nursing agency.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
that's how we found out. It was totally unprofessional.
We found out because the agency called the worker who was here with Jaymon. Ray was gone at a doctor's appointment, and I had an extremely important appointment that I was not under any circumstance going to miss. And I was getting ready to leave, and I heard the agency call and verify that I was there and told her to clock out and leave. And I grabbed my purse and my keys and I ran out the door. I said, I'm sorry to do this to you. I can't, because I am not legally responsible for Jaymon in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
Them finding out Ray wasn't home would have been enough to not allow her to just leave. It was, they put it on me, and that is something that we're gonna have to probably get a lawyer to draft a letter, because these places are continually everywhere from Adult Protective Services telling me I'm legally responsible, but I'm not. I am not legally responsible. I will help my husband all I can. There are times that I do help with Jaymon when Ray is unable to physically stand or do those things. But
we can create an affidavit and just keep that on file, I think,
so
and give it to every agency
University of
that
Michigan has put me down as a caregiver. Technically, Jaymon has no caregiver.
No.
And we are trying to get the 24-hour care from the insurance company that they actually promised they could do. Then we get the runaround and saying that, well, that's not a service they provide, simply because when someone needs 24-hour care, they then recommend nursing homes. But the nursing homes won't take him. Number one, he's too much of a behavioral risk. Number two, nowhere can take him, like a group home. Anywhere can take him. The doctor will not allow him to go into any type of group home or community type setting, because he's too high of a risk for infection. And so that he falls into what they call a donut hole, and that's just an unfortunate situation. But the insurance company was giving Ray the wrong information, and the dual insurance should have kicked in. And so now the complaints have been filed, and who knows whether or not he's going to get the full-time care at this point. But Jaymon needs a team of people. He needs round-the-clock care. Jaymon cannot take care of himself in any way, shape, or form. He can't feed himself. He can't get from the table to the garbage can to the bathroom without getting distracted 6 times. And he might do it 2 or 3 times in a row, and the next time, if you take your eyes off of him, he's gonna be somewhere else or doing something else. Or and the level of care he needs with his diabetes is just he went through a period of almost 4 weeks where he was waking you up in the middle of the night straight. The chemotherapy that they did for him was more along the lines of the pediatric chemotherapy, because they didn't feel like he could actually handle the amount of steroids that would require the adult chemotherapy. And so, but that even the steroids that he had was messing with his blood sugar to the point, he's waking him up. And then
the steroids were
for the first time over the last month, he's developed fear. He has not had any type of fear and anxiety
over nothing,
and it's
over silly,
very
ridiculous
difficult
things
to translate a lot of what he has going on, right?
It's
difficult to translate when he says, I can't breathe. And he's in there screaming at you. Why aren't you doing anything? I can't even breathe. And we kind of laugh at him. Sorry.
Right.
We do.
Because there was a lot of breathing going on during that episode.
I can't walk and need to hobble around with the walker, and then running out and dancing back from the mailbox. Walking right out in front of the cars to get the mail, and things like that, and trying to get, now he's got some issues with his ingrown toenails, and not complain not once that they were hurting. And then as soon as the doctor says, oh, aren't these hurting you? And he's like, no. He's like, it hurts. So you have to determine what's real, what's not. We had to call the paramedics in the middle of the night because he was having genuine chest pain. And for the first time, you could see he was scared. Chest pain. And of course they check him out, say it's not your heart. They're thinking chest pain. They're thinking his heart's bothering him. wasn't his heart, it was the pneumonia.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did end up having to take another ambulance ride to the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
right, to be
A
admitted
week
for
after having a bacterial infection.
Right. So there's a lot of things
Mhm.
you have to determine. You're fine. It's not. I'm not saying it's imaginary, but it's, I can't breathe, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of detective work that you have to do
Right.
to make sure, and that's why it makes it difficult for anyone else to take care of him. His last worker was very good at figuring out. She was a mother, and she was just of boys, and so she was very good at figuring him out very
Mm-hmm.
quickly.
Yeah.
She's very intuitive that way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And she communicated very effectively, and
yeah, she was
I
great.
think only once or twice did he even kind of direct any kind of snarkiness at her at all.
No.
He seemed to relate and respond to her really well. And so when you find someone like that, then all of a sudden they're snatched from you, and it's an autistic environment. Yeah, he was upset. He was furious today. That's the end of a relationship. He's never going to see her again.
Yeah, because she did work the rest of her shift, and that'll be it, because that agency is somehow out of the picture.
And so now we're just out of services, out of coverage, even though I did verify with them this was over some compliance paperwork. So this wasn't an emergency. No one was in danger. Child Protective Services, the police weren't waiting with handcuffs to haul a predator away. There was no emergency. This was totally unprofessional and with no forethought given to the clients. And I'm sorry, that's my problem with government, because they say one thing and do another. It's not about the most vulnerable. And that's I can speak for myself. I can take all that junk, but watching that happen to people that can't speak for themselves is infuriating, and it just makes my blood boil.
Yeah.
So thank you. Sorry.
We were going to maybe talk about this later, and it's later now, but I think we should touch a little bit on the subject of the special needs aspect of it. The fact that there has been no help, there's been almost no resources. He's had to fight for every little service that Jaymon has gotten, and people have taken advantage, people have taken money, people have taken belongings, people have taken time, people have taken from them, and I know the doctors have saved his life, but it's also disheartening too, because they're in the millions of dollars, and
over $2 million just in cancer treatment. At the end of
this,
outside of the rest of his whole life,
I go back, which is, are we in a situation where they're the family doctor said it's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and they're just prolonging the inevitable. The question that comes up for a lot of people that can maybe make their own decisions on when they've had enough, when they would prefer to actually go live the rest of their life, that they have the precious time that they have left, what do they want to do with it? Do they want to continue to go through the treatments and be sick and be confined to home, or do they want to just enjoy and peacefully the time that they have left, and what does that look like? Because we realized that his pneumonia, actually the bacterial infection, he was on death's doorstep again that night. They weren't sure he would make it through again that night. And it came up so suddenly. Not one person from the hospital has stepped up to say, hey, it's time we talk about, hey, what could this look like? Let's prepare for this in case something happens. You hear, well, the infection could kill you, rather than the chemo.
Plan D.
Right. And I circle back to when the social worker had that honest conversation and said, our team said, we probably should not have moved forward with the treatment early on. And because the question is, what are you saving? And that's an easier question for me to ask than for Ray, because that's his own biological son. In talking with some people who have dealt with the community mental health system and other things in adult protective services, who have children who are in pain and never going to get better and can never function on their own, and they're asking a lot of the same questions. What are we saving? And yes, every single life is precious, but Jaymon does fit the criteria. I think there are 7 criteria, and he doesn't meet any of them. He meets all of the conditions, like you're over the age of 22, it's a terminal type disease, you'll never, and then while on all of the 7 things on the other end, he's never going to be able to take care of himself. He's always going to require a team of people. He's always going to require this extremely high intense medical care every day. Is he going to be safe? Is he going to be can he ever take care of himself in any way, shape, or form, financially, physically? And the answer to all of those are no. And so that was the honest conversation that she said, yeah, we just didn't realize how difficult it would have been to place him when we got into this. And so those are some tough questions, because if Jaymon comes out of this and the cancer is still given 3 to 5 years, the doctors will let us know that. But what's his life going to look like? Is this maintenance phase going to prohibit him from, does he always have to be at home and not going to go? This is his last year of school. This is last year of school. And that would not be a decision that Jaymon could even probably articulate himself. And so what are your thoughts on that? Because there are times when Ray is just at his wits end. He hasn't slept in several days. He's in a lot of pain of his own, and he's the only one taking care of Jaymon. Even with my help with a lot of the administrative stuff, it's a lot of physical strain on one person. And that's still even when you had care at the home.
I can't imagine what you hear about those people who are out at sea and they're not even in a life raft, and somehow they survive for weeks. Well, yeah, and so